My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 34 years old, and last Saturday, I walked into my mother's 60th birthday party holding a $180 custom cake in one hand and my silence in the other. That silence didn't last long. The moment I stepped into the banquet hall, I felt the shift. Not just because my phone was buzzing with unresolved work emails or because the cake box was slipping slightly from my grip, but because something in the air was off. The decorations were beautiful. Of course, my sister Nicole had overseen every detail: cream linens, white roses, gold balloons shaped into a 60 that stood taller than the buffet table. She loved creating beauty, especially if she could claim credit for it. And she was in the center of the room, laughing that perfectly rehearsed laugh, surrounded by people who orbited her like she was the sun. I hadn't even made it 10 steps inside before she spotted me. Her voice rang out with theatrical delight. "Oh, look. The family wallet finally showed up." A few guests chuckled. Others glanced at me, unsure whether to laugh or stay neutral. I said nothing. I placed the cake quietly on the dessert table, adjusted it so it sat perfectly centered, then turned away before anyone could see my jaw tighten. But it didn't end there. My Uncle Dale, who treats my bank account like a public resource, stood up with a half-full wine glass and clinked it loudly with his ring. "A toast," he announced, "to the child who gives the most, but matters the least." Laughter again, stronger this time, more confident, like he had spoken some profound, universal truth. And then, as if on cue, my mother lifted her glass with a smile and said, "Don't make a scene, Rachel, it's my day." It wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed. I'd always been the responsible one, the helper, the fixer, the one who paid when someone's card got declined, who showed up early and left last. But in that moment, something broke, not in an explosive, dramatic way, but in the quiet, permanent way glass cracks beneath pressure. I wasn't a daughter. I was a debit card with a heartbeat. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the sealed envelope with the final venue payment, something I'd covered without being asked because my mother's credit card was acting up, and walked it over to the reception desk. "Please make sure this reaches the manager," I said. The young woman behind the counter nodded. I left it there and turned around without another word. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for applause. I simply walked out. At home, I changed into leggings and a hoodie, reheated some leftover stir-fry, and sat on the couch listening to the hum of the fridge. My phone buzzed constantly from the other room. I ignored it. I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow. And for the first time in a long time, I let that emptiness settle in without trying to fill it with responsibility or justification. About an hour later, my phone lit up with a new kind of urgency. Nicole was calling, then texting, then calling again. "Where did you go?" she wrote. "Did you forget to pay the venue a second later? Mom is freaking out. The lights went out. The DJ left. Are you serious right now?" Then came the cousins. Jenna. "Did you really just bail without paying WTH?" Uncle Dale chimed in next. "You couldn't hold it together for one night." The family group chat, which I usually kept muted, had turned into a digital shouting match. Someone asked who was responsible. Nicole responded quickly. Rachel brought the cake and said she was covering the rest. Then she vanished. My mother followed with a predictable attempt to smooth it over. Let's not start drama here, but she didn't deny Nicole's claim either. That said everything. I finally answered. One message. I told them I left the envelope with the front desk, exactly where I said I would, if it wasn't there anymore. Then someone else took it. It was out of my hands. Then I muted the thread again, put the phone face down, and returned to the quiet. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't replay the moment, wondering if I should have stayed or smiled through it like I always did. I just sat there, breathing, realizing something I should have known long ago. I have been carrying this family for years, quietly picking up tabs, covering oversights, solving crises they created, and every time I tried to set a boundary, I was called cold or dramatic or selfish. Every time I said yes, they acted like I'd done the bare minimum. They expected me to be generous without question and silent without fail. The next morning, I got a call from the venue. A calm woman named Marie confirmed the envelope was still safely in their office. It was never picked up. She said, "Do you want to come get it? Or should we mail it?" I nearly laughed. All that outrage, all those accusations, and no one had bothered to ask the front desk. Because they didn't care about the truth. They wanted me to fail. They wanted a story in which I was the problem because that made everything else easier to excuse. That afternoon, I watched the group chat in silence. Screenshots from Jenna showed arguments spiraling, Nicole defending her version, Dale egging her on, Mom occasionally dropping in to say, "We're still family." But no one asked if I was okay. No one corrected the lie. No one reached out except Jenna, who messaged privately, "I know they're twisting it. I'm sorry. I wish I could say something." I didn't reply. Because they were right about one thing, it was a statement, but not the petty kind they imagined. It was the quiet declaration of being done with giving my time, money, and energy to people who never saw me, done with trying to earn kindness, done being the family wallet. And I hadn't even started thinking about revenge yet. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was deliberate, like I'd been excommunicated not with fury, but with indifference. No one called. No one clarified. I could feel it in the gaps between texts, in the long pauses on my social media, the way likes dried up on posts that used to draw comments. It was like I had ceased to exist unless I was useful, and in some twisted way. That made sense. I'd spent so long earning my place through usefulness that the moment I stopped being convenient, I became invisible. By Monday morning, word had spread. The family group chat was now a mess of half-truths and self-justification. Nicole's voice, as always, dominated. Rachel ghosted the event. She insisted. She left without saying a word on Mom's birthday. No less. There were no facts, only interpretations, carefully bent to her advantage. I wasn't even mad. I was intrigued. Watching people reinvent reality in real time is a strange experience, especially when you're the villain in the story. What stunned me wasn't that they blamed me. It was how quickly they defaulted to it. No one said, "That doesn't sound like Rachel." No one paused to ask what led to my walking out. They didn't miss me. They missed the role I played. The ATM, the safety net, the one who absorbed their chaos and made it disappear. A few days later, my cousin Jenna messaged again. "They're having a Zoom meeting tonight to clear the air. But you're not invited. Nicole said it's for people who want to be constructive." I laughed, not bitterly, just the kind of laugh you let out when everything starts to fall into place, when you finally understand where you stand in the system you've been serving for years. "Want to know the worst part?" Jenna added. "They're saying you left to sabotage Mom's night, that you did it on purpose, like a protest." For a second, I wondered if leaving that envelope at the desk instead of hand-delivering it had been a subconscious act of rebellion. But no, it wasn't sabotage. It was self-respect. And maybe for once, the absence of my labor had simply exposed the foundation they'd built everything on me. By Wednesday, I received a voicemail from my mother. Her tone was rehearsed, polite, almost corporate. "I'm disappointed in how you handled things," she said. "Birthdays are about family, not grudges. You could have talked to me. Rachel, you didn't have to make a scene." The irony landed with surgical precision. I hadn't made a scene. I had left, quietly, without shouting or crying or flipping tables. But for a family that thrives on silence, even that was too loud. She ended with, "I love you, but I think you need to reflect on the kind of person you're becoming." I sat with that message for a long time. I played it twice, then again, and with each repeat, I felt less sadness and more detachment. Not rage, just a quiet sense that the woman on the voicemail didn't know me at all. Or maybe she did once, but she stopped trying to a long time ago. I deleted the message. Then I deleted my presence from the group chat entirely. What surprised me most wasn't the guilt. It was the relief. For the first time in my adult life, I felt weightless, like I could breathe in a room without monitoring everyone's temperature, like I could finally set down the invisible bags I'd been dragging behind me for decades. No one noticed how heavy they were because I never dropped them. Not until now. A week passed. Then the letter came. It was in a plain white envelope with my name on it, my full name. Rachel Monroe, written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. There was no return address. Inside, a single sheet of lined notebook paper, torn from a pad, folded 3 times. It smelled faintly of lavender and foundation. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. Her letter wasn't long, 4 short paragraphs. She didn't apologize, not directly, but she said she didn't realize how much I'd been carrying, or maybe she did, and let herself believe I was built for it, that I didn't mind, that I was strong enough to absorb it all without complaint. "You became the strong one so early," she wrote, "that I forgot you were still allowed to feel." That line stuck to me like wet fabric. It was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, I had been more than a utility. She said when Dale made that toast, she didn't laugh because she agreed. She laughed because she froze, because freezing was easier than fighting. "I've been freezing for years," she wrote, "even when it came to you." She ended with something small. "I miss you, not what you do for us, you." I read it twice, then again. Then I cried not from pain or rage, but something quieter, a strange ache, like being seen too late. It didn't fix anything, but it was the first time in my life she tried to reach for me without strings. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw the letter away either. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Mom. "It was short. Would you meet me for coffee next Thursday? No pressure. Just if you're open to it." I stared at it for hours. My first instinct was to ignore it, to protect the quiet I had carved out for myself. But something about the letter still lived in me. Not forgiveness, but the ghost of a door that hadn't completely shut. So I went. I picked a table near the window of a quiet cafe, 1 town over. She was already there when I arrived. She looked small in the corner booth, hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. When she saw me, she smiled, not big, not fake, just careful, like someone unsure they still had permission. "We didn't hug. We didn't start with pleasantries. No fake updates. Just 2 women who shared blood sitting across from one another with years of unspoken weight between them." She spoke first. Not to explain, not to blame, just to ask how I'd been, not as filler, but as a real question. Then, slowly, she admitted what I never thought I'd hear, that she had known. That she had always known Nicole's comments were cruel. That Dale's behavior was exploitative. That she leaned on me because it was easier than fixing the dysfunction. That she let it continue because I let it continue, and she hated herself for it. And I told her how tired I was. How tired I'd been for so long that I forgot what it felt like not to be. How exhausting it was to walk into rooms filled with people and feel utterly alone. How even now, when I looked at her, I wasn't sure if she wanted to reconnect with me or reconnect with the free labor she'd grown dependent on. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She just listened, really listened. When we left, she didn't ask me to come back to the family. She didn't ask me to forgive anyone. She just said, I'd like to try, not to go back, just to start from here. And I nodded. Not because I believed everything could be fixed, but because, for the first time, the weight wasn't mine alone. Still, something about her calm worried me. Because someone else in the family was watching this unfold, and not everyone welcomes change. It had been 3 weeks since that quiet coffee with my mother. And although our conversation was gentle, its aftershocks rippled in strange places. We'd kept our contact limited but steady short texts. The occasional shared photo of her garden or a recipe she thought I might like. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic. But it was the first time in years our connection wasn't transactional. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching quiet, bitter, and waiting. It arrived not long after in the form of a ping. Not a message, not a call, a tag. Nicole had posted a photo in the family group chat I hadn't looked at in weeks. A half-eaten, slouched, plastic-wrapped piece of birthday cake. The caption read, "Still the best cake I've ever had. Guess I'll give her that." No likes, no replies. Just that. It didn't even sting, not like it used to. Instead, it confirmed what I already knew. Some people aren't looking for healing. They're looking for control. And when they can't have that, they fall back on petty jabs, dressed as jokes, hoping to bait you back into a familiar role. I didn't bite. I didn't even open the group thread again. But that didn't stop them from circling. Cousins started reaching out subtle, vague messages checking in, pretending not to be fishing for information. Jenna, the only one who had been honest with me throughout, confirmed my suspicion Nicole had been telling her version of events to anyone who would listen. That I'd walked out for attention. That I'd used the payment envelope as leverage. That I was staging some sort of emotional rebellion for sympathy. She's even saying you manipulated Mom into siding with you. Jenna wrote, like, she actually thinks you're scheming. At first, I laughed. Then I stopped. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized Nicole wasn't confused, she was threatened. My absence had left a vacuum. And vacuums don't stay empty in families like mine, they get filled. Usually with resentment, or rumors, or something worse. And this time, the space I'd left behind was slowly being overtaken by something darker. Jenna told me there was another gathering coming up, a cousin's engagement party. She warned me Nicole was already orchestrating it and using it to reset the family narrative. She's painting you as unstable, selfish, said you need space, so they shouldn't push you. It was brilliant in its cruelty. She could now position herself as the generous one, the forgiving sibling, while subtly isolating me even further. By the time I'd realize it, I'd be too far out to even protest. But here's the thing Nicole never understood about me. I listen. I observe. And while she plays chess for attention, I've been mapping the entire board. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out an old notebook. One I hadn't opened since my 20s. Inside were names, birthdays, notes, tiny details from years of being the dependable one. Who forgot to pay for what? Who lied about rent money? Who borrowed and never repaid? Not out of pettiness at the time. It had just been a way to track things so I could forgive more easily. But now, it looked different. Now it looked like leverage. I didn't want revenge in the classic sense. I didn't want to scream or burn bridges or humiliate anyone publicly. That was Nicole's style. Mine was subtler, precise. And if I was going to sever this connection permanently, I wanted clarity, not just for me, but for anyone who ever saw my silence as permission. It started with Dale. Uncle Dale owed me just under $4,000. I'd paid off the last 2 months of his mortgage back in 2010 after he lost a client and was facing foreclosure. He told me he'd pay me back in 6 months. He never mentioned it again. So I called his wife, Cheryl, kindly, casually. "Hey, Cheryl," I said. I was going through old tax records and realized I never got that repayment from Dale's mortgage help back in 2019. Just trying to close that loop for accounting purposes. She paused, then stuttered, then said, I didn't know about that. Are you sure? Yep. I have the wire transfer saved if you need it. No, she said quickly. I'll talk to him. I'm sorry you had to remind us. I didn't press. I didn't threaten. I let her sit with that information. Because now, the lie had a crack in it, and cracks don't disappear. They widen. Next came Cousin Emily. Back in 2020, she asked me to co-sign a lease because her credit was trashed. I'd done it without hesitation. She ghosted me last year after breaking her lease early, which ended up on my record and cost me a deposit on my own apartment. So I emailed her new landlord. Professional, direct. Hi, I just wanted to confirm Emily's residency status and whether she listed any previous co-signers. I'm finalizing some insurance paperwork and wanted accurate records. Within 24 hours, Emily messaged me. Why are you contacting my landlord? What's your problem? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. What I was doing wasn't revenge. It was release. It was lifting the veil and letting each of them sit in the consequences they dumped on me for years. Because the truth is, when you stop holding up the scaffolding, the building doesn't stand on its own, it falls. Days passed, the messages slowed, the silence grew, and in the middle of that quiet, something unexpected arrived. A voice memo. From Mom. I talked to Nicole, she began. Her voice was weary. She said you've been digging things up and that it's not helping anything. She's worried. That word, worried, as if concern was ever her natural state. No, Nicole wasn't worried she was scrambling, because for the first time, I wasn't just walking away, I was reclaiming space. She's saying you're creating drama. Mom continued, that you're trying to punish everyone. And then, softly, are you? I stared at the screen for a long time. I could have said yes. Could have sent a recording of Dale begging me for help. Could have forwarded receipts and emails and contracts. Could have written a novel called Here's Why You Don't Mess with the Quiet One. But I didn't. Because I was no longer trying to convince anyone of anything. And that, more than any strategy or clapback, was what made them nervous. I was done playing the role. I had set down the bags. And now I was watching as they scrambled to carry what they used to leave at my feet. The memo from my mother hung in the air for a while, like the last echo of a conversation that never truly began. She had asked if I was trying to punish them. The fact that she didn't ask if they had done something wrong told me everything. And yet, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood that silence wasn't just retreat. Sometimes it was the only honest answer. By now, Jenna had stopped sending updates. She had gone radio silent, which I suspected wasn't her fault. Nicole had always had a way of turning people. Not with threats, she wasn't that blunt. She used confusion, guilt, charm. She made you question your memory, your loyalty, your reason for breathing, and if you resisted, she'd simply reframe the narrative without you. So when Jenna finally reached out again, I braced for a bomb. I'm sorry, she wrote. I tried to say something at the brunch. Nicole shut me down hard. She said if I kept defending you, I should stop coming around. I stared at the message. It didn't surprise me, but it still chipped something. Not just because Jenna had tried and failed, but because Nicole was so comfortable weaponizing belonging. She didn't just exile people, she made them feel like they had chosen exile themselves. That was when I realized this wasn't just family dysfunction. It was power. Systemic. Generational power. Nicole hadn't just made me the scapegoat by accident, she had learned, long ago, that I was useful so long as I stayed silent, so long as I played my part. But something had changed. Not just in me, in the air. It happened the following weekend. At a farmer's market, I was thumbing through a bin of organic peaches when I heard my name. Rachel. I turned. It was Elena, my mother's oldest friend, the woman who used to babysit Nicole and me when we were little. Her eyes were kind but sharp. She gave me a hug that lasted a beat too long. "I've been meaning to reach out," she said, stepping back, but I didn't know where things stood. I smiled politely. "I think that's most people these days." She tilted her head. "Your mom misses you, you know. She just doesn't know how to say it." I nodded, but something about her tone lingered. "She also told me what happened," Elena added, "but I don't think it's the full story." I froze. "She said you walked out to make a point, that you left the party just to send a message. But I've known you since you were 5. Rachel, that doesn't sound like you." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I asked the question I hadn't dared say out loud. "What else did she say?" Elena hesitated, but then sighed. "She said Nicole was just joking, that you always take things too personally, that maybe you're going through something." There it was, the invisible poison, not anger, not malice, doubt. Plant enough seeds of doubt, and the whole garden starts to turn against you. I thanked Elena and walked away, the weight of her words trailing behind me like a second shadow. Nicole hadn't just turned the family. She had gone outside the family, too. She was rewriting my character in real time, and I hadn't even read the script. That night, I sat down with my journal and mapped out everything I could remember, every conversation, every insult, every time Nicole had minimized or mocked me in front of others, not just to remember, but to reclaim the version of reality I knew had existed. It was like stitching together a narrative that someone else had tried to burn. And then came the voicemail. This time, from my mother, again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice quiet, "about how you always felt like the support beam, not the daughter. I didn't expect that. I guess I leaned on you because I knew you wouldn't let me fall. I didn't stop to wonder what that cost you." She paused. "I let Nicole control the room too often. She's always been loud, confident, and I told myself that was leadership. But I see now, it was control." Another pause. "I can't fix what's happened, but I want you to know I hear you now. I see you." I sat with that message for a long time. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was closer than anything I'd ever received. Still, there was a gap. Because if she truly saw me, she'd do more than talk into a recording. She'd stand up, say something, call Nicole out. Until then, her voice, no matter how gentle, was still coming from the sidelines. The next day, Nicole texted me directly for the first time since the party. Just 2 lines. "Jenna's been stirring stuff. Thought you should know. Also, Mom's kind of losing it." That was it. No "how are you?" No acknowledgement of the chaos she'd sparked. Just surveillance and blame. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to my mother. No context, no commentary. She never responded. But a few days later, I got a call from Jenna. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Your mom actually confronted Nicole at the family dinner. Said what she said at the party wasn't okay. That she's tired of watching you be treated like a second-class member of the family." I didn't know what to say. She even told everyone you'd paid the venue, that the envelope was never missing, that it was all a misunderstanding, and that they owed you an apology. Something in my chest cracked open, slow and warm. I hadn't needed validation. Not really. But hearing that for once, someone had stood up in the room when I wasn't there, it meant something. Jenna continued. "Nicole stormed out, but your mom stayed. Said she's ready to have a relationship with you that doesn't require pretending." I didn't cry, but my throat tightened. My fingers trembled around the phone. Maybe this was it, the shift. Not a clean resolution, but a turning point. And for the first time in years, I felt the beginning of something I never expected to feel with this family again: control. The morning after Jenna's call, I sat by the window with my coffee, watching sunlight stretch across my kitchen floor. And for once, it didn't feel like a new day had to mean a new battle. There was no apology parade, no dramatic reconciliation, just a sense of space, of stillness, of knowing that, somewhere out there, the truth had been said aloud without me having to fight for it. I didn't need Nicole's apology anymore. I didn't need the family to gather around and chant my name like some redemption arc. I just needed to breathe and to know that I hadn't imagined all of it. Still, I didn't expect the knock. It came that afternoon, a gentle, deliberate knock, not a delivery, not a neighbor. When I opened the door, I found a small box on the mat. No note, no name. But inside was the exact cake I had ordered for Mom's birthday: strawberry cream with vanilla sponge, from the same boutique bakery. Just one slice, carefully wrapped, still cold. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stared at it for a long time, the way you do when a ghost from your past arrives in a way only you can recognize. It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a gesture, an acknowledgement. I left the box on the counter and went back to work. A few days passed. Mom and I kept texting, short and mundane messages, weather updates, a garden photo, a meme about overwatered plants, but I felt something in the rhythm of them. She was showing up differently, not out of guilt, not to fix anything, just to exist in my life without asking me to bend. She didn't bring up Nicole, didn't push me to rejoin the group chat. She never mentioned future birthdays or holidays. And for the first time, our connection wasn't weighed down by expectation. It was simple, and I let it stay that way. Until Nicole called. Not texted, not tagged, called. I stared at her name on the screen for 6 full rings before declining the call. Then she tried again, and again. On the 3rd try, I answered because I needed to hear her voice, needed to hear if anything in her tone had shifted. It hadn't. "I just want to know if you're done," she said. No hello, no warm-up. Done with what? With this, the drama, the exile act. Mom's acting like you're some wounded hero. It's ridiculous. I let the silence stretch. She continued. "You've made your point. Okay. You've had your little independence moment. Can we just get back to normal?" There it was, the real agenda. Normal, her normal, where I showed up, paid, stayed silent, and let her lead, where my worth was measured by how convenient I was. "No," I said, my voice calm. "We can't." A pause. "Rachel, come on, this is family." "Exactly." She scoffed. "So what? You're cutting everyone off now. You're going to live like some island." "I'm not an island," I said. "I'm just not your shore anymore." She hung up. I stared at my phone for a while after that. Heart beating steady, not fast, not slow, just present, grounded. Like I had finally spoken in a language my soul understood. After that, it was quiet, the kind of quiet I once feared, but now, it felt earned. I didn't get uninvited from family events because I'd never been invited to most of them to begin with. They just expected me to show up, and when I didn't, they didn't know what to do with the empty chair that had never been acknowledged as mine. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. I started hiking again, something I hadn't done since college. The first time I reached the summit of the local ridge trail, I sat with my legs dangling over the edge and cried, not from sadness, but from a strange gratitude. I was here, still me, but lighter. Mom and I met for coffee again, then lunch, eventually, brunch, always just us, always neutral ground. She never pressed, She never pretended everything was okay. Sometimes she said things like, "I wish I'd said something sooner," or "I let Nicole fill the room because I didn't know how to hold space for both of you." I didn't correct her. I didn't console her either. I just let the words pass between us like wind through leaves. One time, she said, "I miss when we were all together." I looked at her and said, "I don't." She didn't argue. And that, somehow, meant more than anything else. I wasn't looking to rebuild the past. I wasn't interested in re-entering a system that only worked when I played the part of the silent provider. I was interested in living, in laughing without checking who was watching, in being seen without having to bleed to be visible. Eventually, I told my therapist, "I think the revenge already happened." I stopped showing up, and the whole thing collapsed. She smiled and said, "That's not revenge, that's reclamation." And she was right. The real victory wasn't in exposing anyone. It wasn't in the passive-aggressive texts, or the whispers that maybe Rachel finally snapped. It was in the peace that settled into my bones when I realized I didn't need them to change to feel whole. One day, I bumped into Dale at the grocery store. He looked at me like I was a ghost he owed money to, and, in a way, he was right. He stammered out a hello. I nodded. Nothing more. I didn't need repayment. I needed distance. And distance, finally, was mine. Sometimes something. Jenna and I still talk. Carefully, quietly. She's building her own boundaries now, and I try not to pull her into mine. I send her book recommendations. She sends me updates about her dog, and that's enough. One morning, as I was watering the succulents by my windowsill, I realized something strange. I hadn't thought about Nicole in days, and when I did, it wasn't with anger or longing. It was with detachment. The way you remember a character from a book you once read too closely. You know how it ends, but you no longer feel the twist in your gut. That day, I wrote something in my journal. I am no longer the family wallet. I am not the fixer, the fallback, or the forgotten. I am Rachel Monroe, 34 years old, and I exist fully outside their needs. And then, just below it, I added, and for the first time in my life, that is enough. Story 2. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 37, single by choice, childless by default, and for the past decade, I've been the unofficial financial and emotional backbone of my brother's family. Eric, older by 5 years, louder by 10, has always carried himself like a man wronged by fate. But if fate really owed him anything, it sure as hell wasn't my paycheck. When he got laid off from his job in construction management, I covered his mortgage for 6 months. When his wife, Karen, had emergency surgery and the deductible gutted their savings, I handled it. Their kids' birthdays, back to school, holidays, I showed up like clockwork with gifts, support, and the kind of patience you only develop after being sidelined so often you start bringing your own chair. I never complained. Family, right? That's what we tell ourselves to justify bleeding slowly for people who'd never do the same. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving when everything began to fracture in a way that couldn't be patched over with platitudes or another check. I was at their house, helping set up for dinner. Karen was in the kitchen wrestling a turkey into submission, while the kids, Jamie and Nolan, tore through the living room in a sugar-fueled frenzy. Eric sat reclined in the leather chair I helped finance, cradling a beer and watching football, with the confidence of someone who thought the world would eventually bend in his favor. That's when he said it, casual, almost like a weather update. No place for losers in this family. I blinked. What I asked, half laughing, expecting a joke. He didn't look at me. Some people always fall behind. Can't keep up. Dead weight. You know the words hung there, not aimed like daggers, but dropped like anvils. And in that moment, I realized he didn't see me as someone who held him together. He saw me as someone who couldn't build her own life. I wanted to believe he was drunk, tired, bitter, something, anything but honest. You mean like when you couldn't keep up with your own mortgage? I asked. Voice sharper than I intended. He didn't flinch, just gave me this smug half shrug. That was different. I bounced back, except he hadn't. He was still barely working, still relying on Karen's nurse shifts and the invisible support funneling through my Venmo. And yet, somehow, I was the one being labeled a loser for not having a husband, a house full of kids, and a mess of financial chaos trailing behind me. I left that night without saying goodbye. No fight, no scene, just silence. Because sometimes the cleanest exit is the loudest thing you can do. I didn't show up for Thanksgiving or Christmas. They didn't ask why. And for a while, that was the end of it, or so I thought. Months passed. I found peace in the absence. My bank account stabilized. I started running again. Took up woodworking. I even met someone. His name was Daniel, and he didn't care that I came from a mess. He liked my solitude, respected my boundaries. Life got lighter. Until April. That's when the calls started. Karen first. Voicemail. Hey, it's me. Things are rough. Eric wants to talk. Please call. Her voice cracked halfway through. And not from performance. There was desperation there. The kind that doesn't fake itself well. I didn't answer. I stared at the phone, waiting for the guilt to rise like it used to. It didn't. What I felt was closer to relief. For once. I wasn't bleeding financially for people who saw me as disposable. But silence has a way of becoming pressure when you're trained to respond to everyone else's crisis. 2 days later. It was Eric who called. His voice, strained but still coated in entitlement, said, I know we've had our differences. As if calling me dead weight in the house I kept upright was just a mild disagreement. He spoke of tough times, failing job leads, the stress of it all. Then the ask. You've always been good with people. Maybe you could help me network. No apology, no ownership. Just a recycled request dressed up as olive branch. I didn't call back, but I could feel it beginning to spiral. And the next message only confirmed it. A bitter, guilt-laced text accusing me of abandonment, reminding me that I always said family mattered. He ended it with, hope your precious independence is worth more than your niece and nephew. That one hurt. Because Jamie and Nolan weren't part of this mess. They were the only ones who ever looked at me like I mattered just by showing up. I still had their crayon drawings pinned to my fridge. It would have been easier if they were just extensions of him. But they weren't. And that made everything harder because love, when mixed with betrayal, becomes the sharpest thing you'll ever carry in your chest. And just like that, the line between silence and action began to blur. The third message came from Karen again. But it wasn't like the others. It didn't ask me to call back. It didn't even mention money. It just said, Tim's not himself. The kids are scared. I don't know what to do anymore. That line sank deep. Not because it absolved Eric Tim, in this version, but because it reminded me of the collateral damage. Kids shouldn't be afraid in their own home. And even if I had drawn my line in the sand, I hadn't prepared for the moment when staying behind it might mean turning away from someone who needed more than money. Someone who needed safety. So I drove over. No plan, no speech. Just instinct, gut, and a tiny shard of guilt I hadn't yet buried. Their house looked like grief. The lawn was overgrown, brittle weeds waving like a silent welcome. The gutters drooped, heavy with months of neglect. A foreclosure notice flapped on the front door. Its edges curled like paper surrender. I knocked twice. No answer. I was about to leave when I heard the sound kids arguing. A dog barking. something glass shattering. When the door creaked open, Jamie stood there, 10 years old, but looking closer to 13. With that kind of early maturity that only shows up in kids who've had to grow up too fast. "Uncle," she whispered, like she wasn't sure I was real. I smiled and said, "Hey, kiddo." Before she wrapped herself around me like I was an anchor she'd been drifting without. The inside of the house was worse. Dishes were stacked like a monument to chaos. Bills littered the table. The smell of stale beer clung to the walls. And Tim, he was on the couch, hunched over, staring blankly at a muted TV. He didn't even look up when I stepped in. "You came," he mumbled, like I'd betrayed his expectations by showing up. "You look like hell," I said flatly. He let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, well, life's been character building." We sat in silence for a beat too long, the kind that feels like it's choking on everything unsaid. Then he said it. "You know I didn't mean what I said." I looked at him, waiting. "But you did." I replied, "You meant it then, and that matters." He didn't deny it. He didn't defend himself. He just stared at his hands, fingers twitching like they wanted to do something useful, and didn't remember how. "I was an ass," he admitted, voice thin. "Still am. Probably. Definitely." I confirmed. Then, without warning, he broke. Not loudly, not performatively. Just a slow, shuddering collapse of a man who finally realized he'd run out of borrowed time and borrowed grace. I didn't comfort him, not immediately, because some people need to sit with the wreckage before they understand what they destroyed. Sometimes rock bottom isn't the basement, it's the mirror you've avoided looking into for years. I stayed the night, not for him, but for the kids. Nolan clung to me like I was the last buoy in a storm. Karen didn't say much. Her eyes were glassy, face pale. She didn't thank me, didn't apologize either, just nodded like a soldier too tired to salute. By morning, Tim was up, nursing black coffee and regret. He avoided my gaze. "I know what you're going to say," he muttered. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, where collection letters had replaced placemats. "No," I said. "I don't think you do." He looked up, the first flicker of fear crossing his face, the kind that comes not from punishment, but from the realization that this might be the final chance. "I'm not here to fix this," I said slowly. "Not this time. I came because your kids needed someone to show up who wouldn't yell, or fall apart, or drink until the walls bled." He flinched. "Good. That meant it landed. I'm not asking you to fix it," he said, voice barely audible. "Good," I replied, "because I won't." He opened his mouth, maybe to plead, maybe to deflect, but I raised a hand. "You want help, earn it. No more guilt, no more martyr act. You get up, you show up, and you start doing the work." Then I reached into my coat and slid a folded paper across the table, a list of job placement centers, addiction recovery programs, and a social worker I knew through volunteering. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "You're serious?" he asked. "Dead." He didn't argue, just stared at the list like it was a foreign language he was expected to be fluent in overnight. Then, after a beat, he nodded. Not a proud nod, not even a hopeful one, just the barest admission that maybe. It was time to stop falling and start climbing. I stood up. "I'll check in for the kids, not for you." And then I left. No hugs, no parting words. But this time, I felt lighter. Like maybe I wasn't abandoning family. Maybe I was finally challenging it to be better. The following week passed in a haze of silence. which strangely didn't rattle me like it used to. I wasn't obsessively checking my phone anymore. I wasn't dreading the next wave of guilt-laced voicemails or emotionally manipulative texts. Tim didn't reach out, and I didn't chase. That wasn't indifference, it was deliberate. A calm boundary finally respected, or at least left undisturbed. Instead, updates came through Karen. Sparse, factual, nothing flowery. He went to the job center today. He didn't drink last night. He was late picking up the kids again. Progress, but messy, fragile. And I let it be that way. For the first time. I wasn't trying to rescue him from his own consequences. I was simply watching, waiting to see if effort would finally take root where excuses once grew wild. Then, one Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with something slightly different. Tim went to the interview. Karen had written, "Didn't get it. Still trying. Thought you'd want to know." I stared at that message longer than I should have. Not because it was groundbreaking, but because of the weight it carried. Trying, not succeeding, not performing, just trying. It was more than I'd seen from him in years. Part of me wanted to call, offer encouragement, guidance, even praise, but I didn't. Instead, I replied, "Keep trying. Not doing this for me. Do it for them." His response was a simple thumbs-up emoji. Underwhelming, maybe, but it felt different. Not like an obligation fulfilled, but an acknowledgement of something heavier: respect. That weekend, I invited Jamie and Nolan over to my house. No agenda, no serious talks, just pizza, a movie, and maybe a little space to breathe. Jamie told me, with quiet pride, that her dad hadn't yelled all week. Nolan chimed in, saying Tim had made pancakes that didn't taste like charcoal. Small victories, but their voices carried something I hadn't heard in a long time: hope. And I realized I didn't need a dramatic transformation to feel like things were shifting. I just needed the absence of dread, the normalcy of a night without walking on eggshells. I still didn't trust Tim fully. How could I? But I trusted my own limits now. I wasn't standing there with a wallet in my hand. I was standing with my eyes open, heart guarded, and expectations firmly grounded. A few days later, he showed up, not through the back door of guilt, not hiding behind Karen's pleas. He stood on my porch with his hands shoved in his coat pockets, looking like a man halfway between apology and uncertainty. I opened the door, said nothing. He met my eyes. "I'm sorry." Plain, quiet. No excuses. No bargaining chips. I waited. I said something I can't take back. "I treated you like a resource, like a plan B, not like a brother." The words landed, not with a crash, but with a dull, aching honesty. I crossed my arms, keeping the silence intact. He fumbled in it for a while before continuing. "You didn't deserve that. You saved us, more than once. And when I had the chance to treat you with respect, I didn't. I spit on it." He shifted awkwardly, the weight of his own voice catching up to him. "I've been going to a program. They talk a lot about ownership, about earning trust." Not expecting it, I finally spoke. "Good. You should feel that weight." He nodded slowly. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to say it to you. Not through anyone else. Just me." I watched him, really looked at him. He was thinner, yes. More tired, but he was there. Fully present. Not a performance. Not a manipulation. For once. This wasn't about what he wanted from me. It was about what he owed himself. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "We're not there yet. But we can talk." And so we did. No grand reconciliations. No pledges or guarantees. Just two siblings at a kitchen table, sipping coffee that tasted like caution and history. He didn't ask for money. He asked for advice, something so rare I almost missed the moment. And that was the shift. It was the first step that didn't belong to me. The first seed he had to water on his own. As he left that night, he paused at the door and said, "Thanks for giving me a minute." I nodded. "Earn the next one." He didn't argue, just nodded back. And for the first time in years, I believed maybe he actually would. 8 months later, winter rolled in with its quiet hush and layered silences. My neighborhood transformed into something out of a snow globe, frosted rooftops, twinkling porch lights, the smell of chimney smoke drifting into the street. It was the kind of cold that wrapped around you but didn't bite, just reminded you of time passing. Inside my house, it smelled like cinnamon and pine. For once, I had strung up lights early. For once, I actually wanted the holidays to come around. There was no looming sense of obligation, no mental calculation of which crisis needed managing. Just peace, real, grounded, ordinary peace. And then, in that quiet, 2 envelopes arrived, each with a weight heavier than their postage. The first was hand-drawn, crayon and glitter pen, uneven stick figures around a lopsided tree. Jamie's handwriting, unmistakable. "Come over this year, Uncle. We saved your spot." Her little brother had added a tiny sketch of a dog with a speech bubble. "Don't forget the cookies." I smiled, blinking longer than necessary at the crooked hearts dotting every I. The second envelope was more restrained. No glitter, just Tim's handwriting, clumsy and slightly slanted. Inside, a note. "There's a place for you here if you want it. No expectations, just a real invitation." I held that paper like it might disappear, because for once, Tim hadn't tried to guilt me, hadn't demanded, hadn't pretended nothing happened. He was offering a seat not out of entitlement, but effort. I drove over that evening, not with dread in my chest, but with curiosity. I parked in front of the same house I once walked away from. But this time, I wasn't bracing for disaster, I was bracing for change. Karen opened the door and smiled, tired, but not strained, the kind of smile people wear when they're rebuilding. Brick by brick, the kids shouted my name, their joy unfiltered and honest. Jamie tackled me in a hug so tight it knocked my hat off. Inside, the tree was modest, the lights soft, gifts were stacked neatly, not extravagantly. The kitchen was warm with the smell of cookies baking and something real simmering on the stove. And Tim looked different. Not perfect, not healed, but present. He wore a sweater with a reindeer that blinked when you pressed its nose. And somehow, that was the most sincere thing I'd ever seen him wear. We exchanged gifts, small, thoughtful ones. Jamie handed me a little wooden figure she had carved in school, a man holding up a house. "Mom said you held ours together," she whispered, so soft only I could hear it. I swallowed hard. "Not anymore. Kiddo, that's your dad's job now." She smiled. "He's trying." And maybe he was. He sat next to Karen, not slouched, not distant, but listening, really listening, as Nolan talked about a school play. His responses weren't perfect, but they were there. After dinner, while the kids played with wrapping paper more than actual toys, Tim and I stepped outside. Snow had started to fall again, quiet and unhurried. He didn't start with another apology. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, "This is the first year I didn't dread the holidays. First year I didn't feel like I had to perform being a good dad." I looked at him. "Because you're actually trying to be one." He nodded. "Yeah. Turns out it's easier when you're not drunk, unemployed, and lying to everyone." We both laughed soft, tired laughter, the kind that doesn't cover pain but coexists with it. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Thank you for walking away. If you hadn't, I don't think I ever would have stood up." There it was. The full circle moment I didn't think I needed. Not just closure, but accountability turned into clarity. I didn't say much, just nodded. Some truths don't need embellishment. As I left that night, Jamie chased after me with a foil-wrapped bundle of cookies and a note. Bring these home, come back soon, and for once. The soon didn't feel like pressure, it felt like a promise. I got into my car and sat there for a while. The envelope from Tim still in my coat pocket. The same man who once called me a loser had learned how to say welcome back without pride, without shame, just honesty. But the truth is, I hadn't just been waiting for his growth. I'd been growing too. Finally understanding that love isn't measured by how much you give, it's measured by whether it's respected. And this time, it finally was. Yet deep inside, I couldn't help but wonder, what if he slipped again? What if this hope, this fragile thread of change, snapped under the weight of old habits? I wasn't scared of that anymore, because now, I had boundaries stronger than nostalgia, and I knew, with quiet certainty, I'd never trade my peace again, not even for the illusion of family. But still, I had said yes to the invitation. Not because I needed their validation, but because I believed. This time, we were starting something honest, something that didn't require saving. Just presence. Story 3. My name is Rachel Parker. I'm 25 years old, and I still remember the exact moment I realized my family had never really seen me. It was the day I graduated magna cum laude from the University of Washington with a degree in mechanical engineering, 4 years of brutal coursework, sleepless nights, and 3 part-time jobs just to stay afloat. It was supposed to be the day they finally showed up for me, the day they'd finally be proud of me. I stood outside the grand hall in my cap and gown, diploma gripped tightly in my hand, fake smile plastered on my face as families around me cried, cheered, took selfies, and shouted names with joy. It was chaos, but the kind you want to belong to. All I wanted that day was for someone to look at me like I mattered. But when my parents finally arrived, late as usual, that fragile hope collapsed with the weight of their indifference. My mom, Lisa Parker, wore a sleek designer dress and gave me an air kiss so carefully executed it didn't smudge her lipstick. My dad, Richard, clapped me on the back like I was a golfing buddy, not his eldest daughter. My younger sister Emily didn't even look up from her phone. She'd posted a selfie from the car with the caption, "Off to watch the nerd get her paper." Charming. I had barely swallowed my disappointment when Dad pulled a white envelope from his coat pocket. "We got you something generous," he said with a smug smile. It was thick, sealed with gold foil. I stupidly assumed it was a check, maybe not for all the tuition I covered alone, but at least a token, a gesture, something. Maybe this was their way of finally recognizing the sacrifices I made while they funneled money into Emily's Paris study abroad and her wellness retreats in Tulum. But when I opened the envelope, all that hope unraveled. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, typed, cold, impersonal. It read, "Congratulations on your graduation. As a family, we believe it's time for you to begin your independent journey. Starting today, we will no longer be providing financial assistance. We believe this will help you build character and resilience. With love, Mom, Dad, and Emily." My mouth went dry. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just looked up and saw 3 satisfied faces looking back at me, proud of their tough love moment, like it was some kind of inspirational montage. My dad actually said, "We're proud of you, kiddo. Now it's time to stand on your own 2 feet." I nodded, slowly. I folded the letter back into the envelope and slipped it into my bag. "Thank you," I said, calm, steady, almost grateful. But inside, I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I felt nothing, just a click, like a switch flipping. Because the truth was, I'd already been on my own for years. I just hadn't realized until that moment that they knew it too. They'd just finally decided to make it official. And with that realization came a new kind of clarity. I smiled not because I was happy, but because I finally understood. I took a photo with them, one last picture to mark the end of a chapter, and I promised myself the next time they needed me, I'd return the favor, just as generously. A year later, they gave me that chance, on their 30th wedding anniversary. No less. They rented out the Magnolia Grand Ballroom crystal chandeliers, gold foil invitations, champagne towers, the works. They flew in a jazz quartet from Chicago. Mom wore a floor-length Vera Wang gown. Dad bragged about the menu like he curated it himself. And of course, they invited me, not because they wanted me there, but because appearances mattered. I was the successful engineer daughter now, the one they liked to name drop even though they hadn't supported me since the day they cut me off. What they didn't know, what no one in that ballroom knew, was that in the past year, I'd started my own engineering consultancy. Quiet, profitable, growing. I'd hired 2 of my smartest classmates, landed several steady clients, and built something real, something mine. But that wasn't even the biggest secret. The real one 6 months ago. After a bad investment tanked Dad's finances, they quietly defaulted on their mortgage. The house, the one I grew up in, the one they swore would stay in the family forever, went into foreclosure. And the anonymous LLC that bought it at auction. That was me. I let them stay. Of course. Signed a rental agreement with generous terms so they wouldn't question a thing. They'd been paying rent to me for half a year without knowing. Until tonight. Until this very ballroom. And as the jazz quartet played their final prelude before the toasts, I walked toward the stage, heart steady, plan complete, ready to deliver the letter of my own. Because if they thought what they did to me was character building, they were about to learn just how much character I'd built. The ballroom shimmered with gold-accented grandeur. Everything about the night screamed perfection except the truth. I stood near the back, watching guests laugh politely, sipping champagne as servers passed around miniature lobster rolls on porcelain trays. Every corner of the room was meticulously curated for vanity strings of fairy lights hung like stars. Live jazz floated in the air, and printed menus bore the Parker family crest. My family had spared no expense. For them, this wasn't just an anniversary, it was a performance, a brand-building exercise, a chance to show the world how enviably perfect they were, and they expected me to play the role of the successful daughter, the one who'd risen thanks to their tough love. But tonight, I had a different script. When the lights dimmed and my dad took the mic, I knew it was time. 30 years ago, he began, eyes moist with fake sentimentality. I married the love of my life, and together, we built everything you see here. Our family, our home, our values. My mom dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Emily angled her phone just right for her Instagram story, applying a sparkly filter mid-toast. The guests smiled politely, leaning in. Then my dad said it, and look at our daughter's Emily with her creativity, her passion projects, and Rachel, the engineer, standing strong on her own 2 feet. That's what Parker Grit looks like. I could almost hear the applause in his voice before it even started. I stepped forward. Mind if I say a few words, I asked as I reached for the mic. Smile practiced and calm. The guests turned to me, expecting a sweet speech, perhaps a heartwarming tribute. Hi everyone, I'm Rachel. I'm the daughter who got a letter instead of a gift last year. Nervous chuckles. My voice didn't waver. That letter where my family told me they'd no longer support me financially changed everything for me. It taught me to stop expecting support, even from people who claim to love you unconditionally. I paused, scanning the room. No one laughed now, In that moment, I learned something far more valuable than any inheritance. I learned that survival wasn't enough. I wanted freedom. So I built something of my own, a firm. We signed our 20th client last week. Polite applause scattered like raindrops. I kept going. But that letter also taught me to recognize opportunity. Like when a house goes into quiet foreclosure and gets listed under an anonymous LLC. A house the owners never imagined they could lose. I turned to my parents, locking eyes with my father. Yes, Dad. Yes, Mom, you've been paying rent to me for the last 8 months. I own the house now, and after tonight, the rent goes up to market rate. The silence was volcanic. My mother's mouth fell open in a soundless gasp. My father's grip tightened around his glass. Emily's phone slipped from her fingers, shattering on the ballroom floor. I handed the mic back to the stunned MC and walked off stage as calmly as I had approached. Checkmate. But I didn't wait for the fallout. I walked past the stunned guests, through the double doors, and into the cool evening air outside the Magnolia Grand. My phone began buzzing before I reached my car. First it was Mom. You ruined our party. Come back inside right now. Then Dad. What the hell do you think you're doing? And finally Emily. You manipulative little psycho. I muted the thread. The rage vibrating from my family couldn't touch me anymore. But just as I slid behind the wheel, I heard the ballroom doors slam open behind me. My dad stormed into the parking lot, fists clenched, voice loud enough to echo. You think that was funny? He barked. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. I stepped out of the car, calm as a winter lake. No, Dad, I think it was poetic. His face turned crimson. That was revenge for what? Teaching you to be strong. I met his eyes without blinking. No, you didn't teach me strength. You gave me a boot to the ribs and called it a life lesson. I built strength by crawling out of the hole you left me in. He pointed a finger, shaking. You don't own that house. You're bluffing. I pulled a neatly folded deed from my jacket pocket. His name wasn't anywhere on it, but mine was, signed in sharp ink under my LLC's name. He scanned it, paled, silent. You lied to us, he whispered. No, I said. You just never bothered to ask where I was living, what I was doing, or what I was building. You were too busy polishing Emily's failures and calling them potential. I turned back toward the car, lowering the window as I slid into the seat. I'm raising the rent 15%, I said. Still cheaper than moving, but if you prefer, I can begin the sale process. There are buyers waiting. He just stood there, paralyzed in his own pride. The same pride that once convinced him I'd never be anything without their help. As I drove off, I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. I felt resolved. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the pressure to prove, to please, to survive, it was gone. What came next wasn't about retribution. It was about restoration. They didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end. Emily was next. And unlike my parents, she hadn't learned a thing. Not yet. 3 weeks passed after the ballroom ambush. Silence. Not just from my parents, but from Emily. No snarky texts, no veiled insults on Instagram, not even a sarcastic gif. I figured she was fuming, probably crafting one of her patented apologies manipulative, vaguely spiritual, and dripping in curated vulnerability. The kind where she pretends to take accountability just long enough to reset the power dynamic. But when she finally showed up, she didn't come with an apology. She came unannounced, oversized sunglasses on, holding a $7 latte like it was a birthright. It was a Saturday. I'd just made coffee and was working through a vendor contract when the buzzer rang. I glanced at the camera and saw her still flawless, still theatrical. I buzzed her in. She walked into my apartment like she owned it, barely glancing around. Nice place, she said, her voice all bite. No sugar, Didn't realize stabbing your family in the back came with hardwood floors and a view. I shut my laptop and kept my tone neutral. Didn't realize you remembered where I lived. She ignored that and flopped onto the couch like it was a chaise lounge. Look, I get it, you're pissed. They handled it badly. But that speech, the rent hike. Come on, Rach. They're still your parents. Do you really need the money that bad? I leaned forward. Do you? That stopped her. What? I held her gaze. I saw the Venmo request to Dad last week. Groceries, Uber, laptop repair. Funny thing is, the laptop you claimed was broken. You listed it for sale using a stock photo. Her composure cracked. Just slightly. You're stalking my finances, she asked. Defensive. I'm watching my tenants. I said evenly. And their dependents. Emily's smile vanished. So what? I live with them. I'm family. So was I said quietly. The silence between us was sharp. She broke it with a scoff. What do you want, Rachel? An apology, a parade. You want me to say you were right? I stood up, walked to the desk, pulled out a folder, and dropped it in front of her. No, I said. I want you to read this. She hesitated, then flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her expression shifted from irritation to confusion to a slow, horrified realization. Proposal to acquire LLC assets. Full buyout. Valuation 0. Liabilities $112.85, she read aloud, her voice going thin. What is this? I sat across from her. I bought your business, I said calmly. Soul Bloom. It defaulted after the last loan. You used Dad's name as a cosigner when the rent went up. He had to shift some assets. Your business was one of them. She slammed the folder shut. You bought it through your LLC. That's low. Even for you. No, I said. You defaulted. I just cleaned up the mess. You've always been jealous of me, she snapped. Since we were kids. You hated that people liked me more. I let out a short laugh. No, Emily. I used to wish I was you, until I saw what being you actually costs. No accountability, no work ethic, just chaos hidden under pastel filters and recycled affirmations. She stood, shaking with fury, but her voice trembled when she asked, What are you going to do with it? The name, the site, my mailing list. I took a sip of coffee. Nothing. I'm dissolving it next week. It's already in motion. Her jaw clenched. You can't. That's my brand. That's my future. No, I said. It was a toy you left in the rain. I just made sure no one else trips over it. She left without another word. I didn't follow. I didn't check her socials. I didn't look back. But later that night, my phone buzzed again, this time from Dad. The message was curt. Whatever you're doing to your sister, stop. You've made your point. Enough is enough. I didn't respond, because it wasn't about making a point. It was about forcing them finally to see the damage they'd done. And even if they didn't say it aloud, I knew they felt it now, for the first time in years. They were listening. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The house was next. And this time, I wasn't waiting for their consent. 2 months after the confrontation with Emily, I stood across the street from the house I grew up in. It looked exactly the same, white shutters, ivy trailing the porch columns, the chipped stone mailbox my dad swore he'd fix every summer, but never did. A moving truck idled in the driveway, its hydraulic lift groaning as it swallowed the last of the curated furniture and gallery wall art. The house, once a symbol of generational pride, now looked like a shell, a theater after the curtain drops and the audience has left. They were moving, not downsizing to be closer to the lake, like they told the neighbors, but leaving because they had no choice. When the lease expired, I didn't renew. I gave them 60 days, waived the cleaning fee, followed every regulation to the letter. They had nothing on me. They pleaded first, then blamed me, then guilted me. And when none of that worked, they quietly gave in, the way people do when they realize the system no longer bends in their favor. Mom sat in the passenger seat of the SUV, eyes forward, unmoving, her posture stiff as glass. Dad stood near the mailbox, checking his phone like it might contain a loophole back to the life they used to control. Emily hadn't come to help them pack. Her latest Instagram story showed her in Bali, captioned with something spiritual and vague, letting go to rise higher. I didn't comment. As the last box was loaded, Dad finally looked up and saw me across the street. He hesitated, then walked over, slow and deliberate, like he was dragging his pride with every step. "You win," he said, not meeting my eyes. His voice was cracked, less angry than hollow. I crossed my arms. It wasn't a game. He nodded once, glancing back at the house. "She misses you, you know," he added, nodding toward the car. "Your mother." I kept my voice even. "I missed you both for years. You didn't notice then." He exhaled, the kind of breath people take when the weight isn't physical but still unbearable. "We were trying to make you tough," he said. "We didn't want to coddle you." "I didn't need coddling," I replied. "I needed a family. There's a difference." He finally met my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a man playing a role. I saw someone exhausted, broken in places he didn't know existed. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly. "I already have," I said, and I meant it. That night, I walked through the empty house. I hadn't been inside since the sale. The lights were off, the air still. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, the same ones I used to lie on as a kid, tracing the grain with my fingers while Mom flipped through magazines and Emily twirled in princess dresses. The place felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because I had. I wasn't a daughter begging to be seen anymore. I was a woman who had chosen not to be erased. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I felt clean, like I'd closed a book I used to think would never end. I turned off the lights, locked the front door, and slid the keys into the realtor's Dropbox. The listing would go live in 3 days. Back at my apartment, I poured myself a drink and opened my laptop. An email from Priya and James was waiting. Our pitch to a mid-sized solar firm in Arizona had been accepted. It was our biggest contract yet. We were hiring again, growing, thriving, not because of what my family gave me, but because of what they didn't. 6 months later, a thin envelope arrived. No return address, just my name in my mother's looping cursive. Inside was a card. No check, no phone call, no olive branch, just 12 words. "We heard about the award. We're proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." I left it on the kitchen counter. Maybe they were changing, maybe not. But I had built a life that no longer required their validation. I had a team, a purpose, a future, and most of all, I had peace. That was worth more than any graduation gift they could have ever given me.